My name is David Olf. Real name is Mark, but we'll just stick with David Olf for now. Thanks very much. This evening, I figured I would just go through a quick Consulting 101 presentation. Consulting is a topic that comes up a lot. There seems to be a lot of confusion around what consulting is, why it exists, and really what it's like to work in it. And I just want to say this is a very generic overview. I will get a little bit deeper into some of those disclaimers as we go forward. But in general, this is, a broad brush overview of the industry of consulting in the United States. So just a quick note about myself. I've been doing this for about 10 years. I had a very long, weird journey to get here, starting off with being a high school dropout. Eventually got my GED, served in the Army, moved on to Columbia University, where I started to specialize in sustainability and climate research. And then I've subsequently, since graduating, really been working in consulting ever since, across a number of different, I'd say, industries, but all within that same vein of focusing on sustainability. However, the experience that we'll be talking about this evening is really focused on consulting in general, but happy to answer questions about sustainability consulting specifically at the end. So again, just a quick disclaimer up front. This is very generalized overview of the industry. There are literally thousands of firms, all have different flavors of ranks and businesses and how they run their businesses. Some are privately held, some are publicly traded. So there are things in this that may be wrong, given certain experiences that someone might have in the industry, but this is designed to be as generic as possible to give an overview for people who might be interested in joining some of the larger consulting firms, or who may just understand why these firms exist and the role that they play within the broader market. So, very simple question. What is consulting? It is fundamentally the practice of providing expert advice and services within a specialized area. It's that simple. It gets a little more complex as we go through this, and you'll see, but fundamentally, that's all it is. It's a group of experts that a company hires to answer a question, solve a problem, or do some kind of business transformation work. So why does it exist as an industry? The short answer is that it is cheaper for clients to hire consultants than to pay to retain that expertise in-house. So as mentioned, consultants typically come in to provide short-term services, important solutions for which a company may not want to hire that talent and retain that talent internally. So quick example of something like that. Let's say American Airlines, right? They are an airline company that is their core business. However, a service that they might want to provide to their customers is a iOS and Android application so that you can check in, check your flight status, book tickets, and things like that. It doesn't make sense for American Airlines to develop that application in-house. In that instance, they would outsource that work to a company that specializes in application development and spin that up as a project. They'll go out to bid. Different companies will propose to someone like American Airlines as to how much it would cost to develop that application, and then they would go and develop it under contract. Again, one example of that, there are plenty of others where, let's say it's a bank, and that bank has a human resources system, and they need to refresh that system or implement a new system. They don't want to go hire a whole bunch of people to do the implementation work for a brand new HR system. So again, they will go and hire a consulting firm that will come in and do that work for them, along with providing some advice around the business transformation and organizational transformation that may come along with something like a new HR system. These are very basic examples, but it is the function that the consultant serves within the industry is to provide that expert advice and sometimes provide those services at a technical level as well. So there are thousands of consulting firms. Some are more general, some are very, very niche and boutique. The big ones that you've probably heard about and tend to generate the largest headlines, you'll see across the bottom, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, PwC, EY, Deloitte, KPMG, and Accenture. I've categorized consulting as an industry into three very broad buckets intentionally, but I could talk through each one of these and sort of give you an idea as to the different functions within them. So strategy and management consulting is probably the classic one that everyone thinks about when they think about consulting, right? This is the kind of business transformation work that, you know, the Strategy 3, McKinsey, BCG, and Bain are best known for. And really, they don't do much outside of that strategy and management consulting. So this will be things like advising a company on mergers and acquisitions, or a new market that they may want to enter, or some kind of transformation of their business to cut costs, right? Notoriously, these firms are coming in and advising on, well, you can reduce your headcount by doing X, Y, and Z, right? They'll also cover things like geopolitical risk. They'll advise not just businesses, but also government agencies, or governments, heads of government as well. The Big Four and Accenture will also do this same kind of strategy and management consulting work, where they will come in, advise at like the highest strategic levels of a business, and also at some of the more niche levels around organizational structure or human resources strategy and the like. They will also, the Big Four and Accenture, push into this middle bucket around systems integration and IT. This is where the Strategy 3 don't really play, but where these larger companies, larger by headcount, tend to reside, and why they're retaining so much headcount is really in this middle bucket of the systems integration and IT. What this is not only technology strategy, understanding what kind of technology a company should invest in, providing that advice, but also then doing the implementation of that technology. So for example, if there's ServiceNow implementation or SAP, different types of software that a company may be wanting to implement, these companies not only will advise on what software their client should buy, they can then come in and do the systems integration, where they are implementing that software and making sure that it is playing nice with all the other enterprise softwares that may exist within that client's environment. This work can get pretty complicated and sometimes can take years depending upon the size of the client's organization. Not just the implementation, but sometimes these companies will also do an operation of that software as well. Again, the reason they're doing that is because a company may not want to hire and retain 50 experts in ServiceNow. They don't need to necessarily, right? But these companies will have the scale to be able to staff a project and then deliver that project in, you know, a continuous delivery model for an end client. And then lastly, there's this specialty and boutique bucket. Again, can cover all sorts of different stuff, from specializing in financial services or specializing in healthcare to the area that I work in, sustainability. It's not to say that these other larger firms across the bottom don't also do that. It's just that they do those things like healthcare, finance, marketing, plus everything else on the left-hand side. So it is a big industry with a lot of players in it. But I think these ones, like I said, across the bottom are the ones that tend to consistently come up. There are a couple others that are probably worth mentioning, like Booz Allen, who do a huge amount of work for the federal government, along with who's another good example? Well, there are plenty. It is a big industry. So I want to take a moment to talk about expertise within consulting. It is one of the primary critiques of the industry is that you'll hear on both sides, people that work for consulting firms and people that have hired them, that consultants don't know what they're doing. And there is some truth to that, but I think it's also a pretty subjective thing, and it's something that's worth addressing, right? Expertise within most of these consulting firms sits at a fairly concentrated level within the firm. And then that expertise scales the further down the pyramid we go. So from a consulting firm perspective, it doesn't make sense to fully staff a project with a whole bunch of experts on, let's say, a piece of software or a particular business strategy. You really only need one or two who actually know what's happening and really know what to do to help guide and lead the rest of a project team. The rest of that project team are doing, the actual implementation work in addition to learning what the experts on the project are teaching them. So they're becoming experts by doing the work. Where you kind of run into some conflict with this is if you are at a junior level or a mid-level interacting with the end client and don't really have the capacity to answer the questions they're asking, it can be a very bad look on the firm, and it can frustrate an end client. And frankly, most of the time, that's a failure of the more senior people to recognize the situation and ensure that they're there to help answer those questions, and prevent the more junior resources from ending up in that situation. And then a note at the peak of this pyramid are the partners. And this is really talking about those that have equity in these firms. Most of the time, they themselves are experts or were experts, but don't necessarily have the time to continually develop that expertise and maintain that expertise. At the point that they've become a partner, their real value is winning work. And their entire role, most of their role, I should say, is out there maintaining relationships with clients and building the business so that the rest of this pyramid below them has billable work. Not to say that there aren't genuine experts that are partners. There are plenty of them, but it becomes less of a focus of their day-to-day, scaling that expertise, and their focus really becomes on winning the business. So just a bit on actually working in the industry. So again, this is an indicative stratification within the firms. I think the big takeaway that you should have from this slide is that there aren't a lot of ranks within these firms. There's actually a pretty narrow stratification from entry level to having equity or being a partner within the business. So it can take quite a while to work your way through each one of these levels, but they are all they're all important stages, let's say, in the development of a consultant, and ultimately becoming a partner. It really does. It's rare that you'll see someone coming into a consulting firm that hasn't been through some, if not all, of these stages, because there is a certain skill set that you develop along the way. But for those of you that are interested in joining, especially coming straight out of college, you're going to start as an analyst. And it is a very difficult role. You will work a lot of hours. Most of the time, it will be pretty mundane stuff. But hopefully, if you're working for a good firm and you're on a good team, you are learning a ton in those first couple of years as an analyst. And we'll get into some of the skills that you'll learn a little bit later. But fundamentally, as boring as it might sound, it's going to be a lot of Excel. It's going to be a lot of PowerPoint and potentially some other specialized software that you might be using in that role. There is an overlap in some of these as far as timeline goes, and we'll cover that on the next slide, but just know that you can progress through these levels fairly quickly if you're doing two things. One is continuously billing. So you are always attached to, or as often as you can be, attached to billable work and projects so that your time is always being billed to a client. And two, that you are helping to win new work. And we can add a third one in there is really developing expertise in yourselves, really taking an area that you can specialize in. But that's less important, honestly, than being able to deliver good quality work and win new business. That's the fundamental thing that will help you progress through these different tiers. And so a little bit more on the timeline there, and probably to give you a better sense of how these things overlap and the cumulative time that it takes to get through the various ranks, or how long you might sit at some of these ranks. Again, this is like indicative. I've known managers that have been managers for 8 years, right? And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. It doesn't impact necessarily how much you're getting paid. You're getting your annual raises, you're getting your bonuses and the like. Just depends on how someone is progressing through their career. I think one of the big things to note on this is that campus hires, so people that are hired directly out of college, have a 50% attrition rate within 3 years. That is indicative of a couple things, but principally just how difficult it is to do this job when you first start out. It is a lot of hours. It is a grind. You get paid pretty well, but you also get worked very hard. It is also indicative of one of the key ways in which people tend to get peeled off, let's say, from consulting, is the fact that you often aren't given work. You kind of have to find work. You may get hired into one of these consultancies, but just because you're hired doesn't necessarily mean you have a job. And what I mean by that is, back to those billable hours, client-facing work is really what matters. And in order to get client work, you kind of have to hustle. And that can be very difficult for certain people. And that's okay, right? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just ends up not being for you. But a lot of this is relationship building and constantly trying to find what the next project is that you're going to build to. Because if you're not building to a project, you're what's called on the bench. And you typically can't stay on the bench for more than a couple months before the firm cuts you or asks you to leave. The other thing to note on here is that most of the experienced hires are coming in at the manager to senior manager / associate partner level. What that means is that this is someone that has probably not started off in consulting, probably started off perhaps working for a bank, decided that finance as an industry was not something that they wanted to do, and therefore goes and gets hired by one of these consultancies as having a niche expertise in finance and the finance market, and will be focused on financial services clients. This can also be people that have previously worked for the government, for example, and will then be focused on public sector clients. But they're typically going to enter in having done, 8 to 10 years in industry, enter into a consulting firm as an industry expert, and then work their way through up until the point that they choose to become partner and have equity within the firm. Not everyone chooses that. There's reasons why they may not, but it ultimately is a choice, and most of the time it involves buying in, where you will have to put up a certain amount of money. Sometimes the firm will lend you that money to buy in equity, but it's usually going to be several $100,000 to well over $1 million, depending upon the firm. So, a little bit of unsolicited advice as a wrap up here. As I noted, hard skill development. So, at a fundamental level, it's Excel and PowerPoint. And regardless of where you end up long term in a firm, everyone is building PowerPoints. I know partners that are up late at night building PowerPoints. It sucks, but it is fundamental to how we do our job and how we communicate. And as much as I would love for us to take like the Amazon Jeff Bezos approach, where there are no presentations and we all just come in and read silently for a little bit and then make a decision, that just probably is never going to take off culturally within consulting, because clients love presentations and they love deliverables, quote unquote, right? Something that they can take away and read later. And so that just permeates the firm entirely. So practice those skills. Programming languages can come in handy. It depends upon, again, like what kind of consulting firm you're going into. For me, I'm not a programmer, but I have done a whole bunch of learning and certifications as enterprise architect. So while you don't want me writing your code, I know how those systems work, right? I can have a conversation with the right stakeholders in that, build a team around something that may be a more technical solution, and help to manage that team, even if I'm not the one that's hands-on keyboard delivering it. Additionally, you may end up learning some specific softwares as well. So at Deloitte, for example, we have a huge SAP practice, and we have tons of people that all they do are SAP implementations for clients. And it can be very lucrative. I personally find it very boring, but if you don't mind that, it can be very, very steady work. Soft skills are also huge. What is SAP? SAP is a German software company that was started by a bunch of former IBMers, and basically what they make is enterprise software, things that allow you to run your business. So inventory management systems. It can be supply chain systems, ordering systems. It's kind of one of those core platforms that a lot of businesses use. It has a ton of different functionalities. They have a lot of different products. But SAP is kind of one of those ubiquitous software companies. Think of it like a big Microsoft, right? It's kind of like, it's the thing that you run that runs a bunch of other stuff on top of it. I am not sitting in an SAP practice. I know SAP mostly from like enterprise asset management. So how you are managing the different assets within your company. So be it like I said, sort of like some inventories and supply chains and the like. From a soft skill perspective, this is as annoying as it might be, and as much as this frustrates some people, networking, it matters. It's one of those things that it's how people know who you are within a firm, and it's how people decide, hey, I have a new piece of work that needs to get delivered. Who could I call that can help deliver this project? Having those soft skills to be able to build those relationships and maintain those relationships is important to being able to find new opportunities. Again, like presenting on a regular basis, practice public speaking, leading teams. And I do want to talk about conflict resolution in this, doesn't necessarily mean that there's like a fight, like a problem, but really in this context, there's disagreements about a budget or about a strategy or any number of different things. It's how you work through those different disagreements and getting to a consensus. Because generally speaking, things aren't going to happen unless there is consensus for it to happen. So learning from leadership and paying attention to how people who do that well do it is very important. This one, fear of being wrong. This is probably the biggest thing that I see for people coming in, especially straight out of college, is this idea that, well, I'm just going to do nothing or say nothing because I don't know what the right answer is. And I really, really strongly advise against that. It's okay to be wrong. It is not the same as making a mistake, right? But expressing an idea, expressing a thought is so critical in consulting, because especially when you're trying to solve a problem, there's like general stuff that we can say, but each company, each situation ends up being very, very unique. And expressing an opinion or an idea about how to solve something is very important, even if you're completely wrong. That's okay. It's how you're going to learn through the process. And I've seen the people that speak up and aren't afraid of being wrong are the ones that tend to go pretty far. I am wrong all of the time. There's very rarely a call that I get on where I'm saying something and I'm not corrected. That's okay. It's the same thing with a lot of people even more senior than me. It's just how you demonstrate thoughtfulness and some level of expertise, and how you build that expertise is by being wrong. And then lastly, and I kind of touched on this already, but the bench utilization is the key metric. You need to be billing to a project at least 80% of the time, especially when you first start off. And then this idea of eat what you kill, which basically means, hey, if there's no work for you to do right now, then you should go find some work. Go try and close a deal. Go find a team that is working to close a deal with a client. Ask if you can help. That's a great way to get into delivering that work once a project is won. And so with that, thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. If you have any questions, feel free to just put them in chat, or if you want to raise your hand, you can do it over voice as well. Starting off here, what do you do more specifically as a sustainability consultant?
Yeah, so for me specifically, a lot of what I'm focused on today is preparing companies for regulatory compliance. And so the Securities and Exchange Commission within the United States has determined that companies need to disclose their carbon emissions. What that ultimately looks like, we haven't been given full guidance yet, but we know it's coming. And so a lot of what I'm focused on, a lot of what the sustainability industry right now is focused on, is preparing these companies to make those kind of disclosures. And that is got to be done through largely software. So this is mostly a technical challenge, but that is the big one right now. In addition to that, it can be all sorts of things like fleet electrification strategy. I have a client that is their core business is trucks and shipping, and they are looking to transfer their fleet from internal combustion engines to electric and hydrogen potentially. And so providing advisory work on these are the technologies you should be looking at. Here's how you might want to phase it in. Here's the infrastructure that you need to change within your business so that you can support these new vehicles, things like that. So it is pretty broad, but those are a few of the areas that I've been working on most recently.
Okay. J Squared asks, why would consulting companies allow something like pension employees to exist? I imagine already having work allocated would be more efficient.
Yeah. So actually, the bench, this is a great question. The bench serves a really important role. So there's a lot of ebb and flows within the industry. You actually want to maintain some depth on your bench, um, because you never know when you're going to land a big piece of work and you need bodies. Frankly, what you don't want to have happen is have the exact right amount of people, for the work you currently have. Because if something closes and now you have to deliver and you need 20 or 30 people to deliver that project, if you don't have them already on staff, you have to go out and hire them. And that can be a very long, time consuming process and can potentially impact your ability to deliver a project on time. So, some amount of people sitting on the bench is good. Um, and you're not necessarily punished immediately for being on the bench. However, typically beyond 3 months, you should be really worried. But everyone spends some amount of time there. And usually when you're on the bench, meaning it doesn't mean you're not working. Most of the time, what you're doing is writing proposals and trying to win new work. So it also functions as kind of like a quasi sales organization within these firms as well, because a lot of this time is spent writing proposals, getting pricing, perhaps building a demo for something that needs to be sold. So you really are working in the business development side when you're not billing.
Okay. Uh, Elo asks, what's your advice for people who work in non-consulting roles in these firms but want to transfer to consulting? I've heard it's easier to get a consulting role at another firm than transfer internally because your firm typically wants to keep you unless you have poor average performance. Is this true?
Interesting. So I think it is always a good idea to transfer firms. You're typically going to make more money, and it's a great way to get into a new area of business. That being said, like once you're at a place that you like, definitely like build out from there, and stay. It doesn't mean you should always be moving, but if you're in a support role and not directly client facing, and want to flip into client facing work, if you're not getting that support internally, I hope you are. And I hope you've made it vocalized that that's a switch you'd like to make, because the firm should really want to support that. If they're not, then by all means, like you should be putting yourself out there and go fishing, see what you can catch, because depending upon the kind of support area that you're currently working, you'll have expertise, and that expertise is something that a consultancy firm will want to sell. So yeah, that's my advice.
So how did you get into consulting personally? Were you just, out of college, was it always your, dream to become a consultant, or did you something else that happened?
No, it was I kind of fell into it. I was always convinced. So I went, as I mentioned at the top of this, right? I was a high school dropout who ended up at Columbia University, right? And so a lot of the people that were at Columbia were going for those, big four strategy three. And they had their sights set on them from like their freshman year. And to get hired at like a McKinsey right out of university, is hard. And they work very, very hard to do that. And so my thought process was, well, that's silly. I'm not one of those people that's going to work for one of these big firms. So I really focused on more of the hard science side of things, and also then realized I was never going to be a scientist either because I had no ambition of going and getting my PhD. And so then I actually started off in boutique consulting, um, which I always advise people on. So I ended up there mostly because, coming up on graduation, had the hard science background, had worked in a lab, and it was like, well, I need to find something. And I knew I didn't have an interest in the big firms, at least at that time. So I went small firm. The advantage of going boutique is that you're much closer to the clients sooner, and you get to see kind of like the end-to-end business of consulting at an earlier stage than you do by going into one of the bigger firms initially. And then I just kind of bounced around a little bit, went to a couple different companies chasing roles. And then actually Deloitte came and got me after I had established some pretty good expertise within the industry. They reached out to me and offered me the current role that I have.
And you posted that chart. You looked at that chart earlier. Where did you fall on the like manager, senior consultant?
Currently,
Yeah.
senior manager.
Um,
So, and within some firms, that would be called an associate partner.
okay. And does most of your day-to-day still look like, working on specific cases, or are you mostly getting new clients, or you know?
Yeah, so most of my day now is actually doing that, and am I still sharing the screen? I am. Most of my day is now sat here, diffusing that expertise further down. So I'm helping with a number of different projects, but I'm not necessarily like super focused on project work so much as I am on scaling up the whole rest of this pyramid. So I'm fortunate enough to be in a role where billable hours don't necessarily apply to me. It's good that I can bill, but it's not necessary. And the firm has made that decision that as they want to build out their sustainability expertise, that people like me, and I'm not the only one in this role, should be there to help diffuse that expertise to as many people within the firm as possible. So I am teaching a lot. I'm doing a lot of research on behalf of the firm. I am bidding on work and helping to be one of those experts that comes in and really convinces the client that our firm has the expertise to deliver the work that they want delivered. And then post winning the work, I'm helping to advise on those projects and maintain that expertise, right? To make sure that we are delivering high quality work. So it is a mix of keeping the partners educated, educating the bottom half of this pyramid, and then really helping to be the face of the firm to those potential clients and having those initial conversations with them about the kind of expertise and advice that we can bring to their business.
Jace where asks, how does owning equity work as a partner if the company is private?
How does equity work as a partner if the company is private?
Yes.
So, I mean, so it is a partnership model. So you think of it as being a shareholder in a publicly traded company, but you are a shareholder, you are a partial owner of a privately held firm. So in the case of all of these, aside from Accenture, which is publicly traded, all of these are privately held, which means that the partners are the shareholders. And there is a huge benefit to that for them. There's also a huge risk. So partners, as I noted on that pyramid, they're mostly there to build the business and drive new clients. If they're not doing that, the firm collectively can kick them out, even though they have equity. And that does happen. It's rare, but it happens. They essentially buy them out and ask them to go find another job. That's the risk, that if you're not continuously building the business, you potentially get kicked out. The benefit of being an equity partner is a huge amount of income. So like it was released recently in England, for example, Deloitte equity partners average salary is something like 1.2 million pounds annually, right? So they can make a huge amount of money. I mean, same thing with all these companies. You're expecting an equity partner, depending upon how long they've been there, and then the bonuses that they may be getting. All of them are well north of 7 figures.
Okay. This is kind of a trope you sometimes see uh, in online or in literature. Do you often have or ever have companies coming to you kind of wanting a civic answer to their problem? Like maybe that they don't really care, how you find that answer, just that they want this answer.
So they kind of are walking you to, they've already made up their mind. They just want you to be that
Justify
third
it.
party
Yeah.
to confirm it.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot. It happens a huge amount, actually. Usually not on big projects. It's usually more smaller decisions. Something like actually what's on this chart right now, like a merger and acquisition. Usually, when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, so one company wanting to buy another company, most of the time that decision has kind of already been made by the executives within that company, but they will hire a third party to come in and say, like, we want to buy whoever, like Microsoft wants to buy Activision, right? And did. They'll say they've made that decision already. They need a third party to come in and basically validate that this is a good business decision for them to make. Sometimes that validation doesn't go well, right? Sometimes, especially in mergers and acquisitions, when you start to do due diligence, they might find things that are basically like, this is a risk. You probably shouldn't do this. I'm going to bet if there were consultants involved, which I know there weren't, but were there to have been consultants involved in like Elon Musk buying Twitter, they probably would have advised him against it because it wasn't making money and wasn't worth the amount he paid for it, right? It doesn't necessarily change the outcome or the decision that a company makes. But absolutely, there are plenty of times where a company has made a decision and they just want that third party to validate it.
Yeah, I imagine it's much safer as a member of the company to basically say, "Hey, look, he said it too. He said that we should do this too. It's not my fault.
Yeah,
It's his fault."
and that's kind of the point I was making earlier about building consensus too, right? A lot of these companies, be it consulting or just business in general, like people don't want individual liability for decisions being made. So they'll often be looking for, some kind of validation or a mechanism to make a decision collectively. And yeah, a lot of these consulting companies, especially when you're dealing with like the strategy 3, right? Like companies love to hide behind advice that they've gotten from these advisors, right? Oh, well, we're laying off 5,000 people. Well, look, hey, the consultants came in, they took away the business. That's what they advised. They said this is the best way to do things. It's it's a little bit of bullshit, but it also, it works for them. It continues to happen. So clearly, the industry and the market is fine with that approach.
Do you personally find that kind of frustrating, or is it, it's just kind of a fact of the job and you're okay with it?
um, I don't. Yeah, I mean, not to be like too crass. So before I I've had jobs, I've had projects where like we're doing strategic outsourcing, and we know that by acquiring a certain part of a company's business, we're going to be laying people off as part of that acquisition. That sucks. Like it sucks to know that you're going to be doing that. But it's also like, I mean, I hate to say this, that's business. Like that's terrible, right? Like it's not like we're you know, I've always, I think as a result, I've always taken the approach that like I'm always expecting to be laid off, right? Because I just understand that that's a risk of working in corporate world, is that we are at the whims of macroeconomic things or decisions, and that there's always a possibility that I will lose my job. And I think everyone should hopefully take that same approach. It sucks, but it's rare that we're advising people to lay people off. We really do genuinely try to avoid that as often as, because most employers don't want to do that either, right? I think everyone recognizes that there's a human element to it. I think the challenge becomes that like companies do a very good job as acting as a company and not a collection of people. And so there is this very strong tendency to rationalize decisions as being business decisions, even though they impact people. I don't know how else you do it though. It's kind of like I don't know what a better system would be, unfortunately.
All right, we're gonna start wrapping this. Anyone have any final questions? For me, what do you enjoy about your job the most? What keeps you going into work in the morning?
Yeah, I think personally it is the fact that I am specifically working in sustainability. Unfortunately, I don't have to, my role is very rarely impacting things like human resources. It is more about helping businesses transform into lower carbon, more sustainable operations. So, as much as I think it is important that we do that work as individuals, the reality is we pale in comparison to something like the emissions generated from a Walmart, for example. Um, and therefore, however small that role might be, my role might be in helping a company like Walmart, let's say, electrify their fleet and move their, trucks from diesel fuel to hydrogen potentially or batteries. I know that will make a huge difference. I find the work very interesting. And that's what keeps me coming back is that like I can take my little bit of expertise, my little bit of knowledge, and be able to apply it to very large entities uh, and see the results. And that's very satisfying, and it's good. I feel good knowing that the transformations that I'm helping to drive are good for all of us ultimately.
J Squared asks, is there something in the sustainability spirit that you think is overhyped?
Direct air capture. Um, the process of actively removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere using what are called amines. So basically, think of it as a giant vacuum cleaner that's going to suck air, like ambient atmospheric air, in and scrub it of carbon dioxide and push out lower carbon dioxide air. Um, it works. Like the technology is real. It happens. But to do it on a scale that would have impact on atmospheric concentrations of carbon would require an absurd amount of energy, so much energy that we may as well just not and spend our energy and efforts on developing something like fusion or hydrogen or other technologies that will actually just start to replace the carbon emissions that are currently out there.
Nico says we would need like 1 million plants the size of the largest direct air capture plant being built today. I
Yeah,
don't know if
I
we're
mean,
gonna get that.
I've done the math on it before. It's like I actually did like an Excel like spreadsheet like level calculations before, and it was something like I can't remember how many machines you would need, but if we like stopped all carbon emissions today and then ran these machines 24 hours a day, and the carbon that they extracted replaced 100% of steel, concrete, and plastic, it would still take like 500 years. It just doesn't make sense. So
All right. Well, thank you for. I'm just gonna remove 0.0001% of the CO2 emitted by humans. That's good. Um, LO asks, it's hard to not get laid off or get a job as a consultant when deal flow is dry, right? Is the job market rough right now for consulting?
Is a job. It's hard to get laid off or get a job. Oh, is it harder to get laid off? So the market right now is weird. There have been a lot of quiet layoffs, let's say. So remember I was saying that there was a huge amount of attrition right here, about 50%. They hire, all these companies hire under the assumption that 50% of people are going to leave, right? They overhire on purpose because they know they're going to lose half. People aren't leaving these last couple of years. So this attrition rate is stalling. So people are getting laid off, and we're seeing hiring start to slow of new campus hires. And yes, LO saying PIPs, so performance improvement plans, are definitely a way of quietly removing people without announcing layoffs. These are all things that are happening right now. I think for sustainability, we're booming. We can't get enough people. The challenge we have is that there aren't enough people that have knowledge in the space to go deliver the work, which is why a lot of what I'm doing, right, is to function to help diffuse that knowledge throughout the firm so that we can retain more people and just reskill them, essentially, right? It is a bit of a rough time right now, but consulting is one of those things that constantly swells and contracts. And when it contracts hard and it sucks. When it swells big. So it swelled massively during COVID. And we are in a natural contraction back to, I would say, like what the market would normally have. And yeah, it's a painful process.